What do we want? Real democracy! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Real democracy! When do we want it? Now!
Welcome to Real Democracy Now. I'm Nivek Thompson, and Real Democracy Now is a podcast for people who think we can and should improve how democracy works. This podcast looks at democracy from different angles to help you think about how democracy might be improved. Welcome to Episode 8 of Season 1 of Real Democracy Now, a podcast. Season 1 is looking at deliberative mini-publics, and in today's episode I talk with Professor Graham Smith of Westminster University about a project called Democracy Matters, where Graham was involved in running 2 Citizens Assemblies considering issues around local government and devolution. Unlike the deliberative mini-publics discussed in earlier episodes, which were commissioned by government agencies to obtain advice on particular issues, these 2 Citizens Assemblies, conducted in 2015, were initiated by academics.
We were funded on this project because there was a real belief that we were going to have a constitutional convention because all of the political parties who were signing up to a constitutional convention, apart from the Conservatives, and the Conservatives weren't going to win the election. And then the Conservatives won the election. So we had the money to run these assemblies, but no longer, if you like, had the expected degree of political support for the process with the majority party. And the Conservatives, the Constitutional Convention was not high on their agenda. It was high on the agenda of the Labour Party, the Green Party, the Liberals, Democrats, and strangely enough also UKIP, but it was not on the Conservatives' agenda. So we always saw this as an, if you like, an exhibition, an exemplar project to show that what was possible. But unfortunately, it was showing people who are now in opposition what was possible. So we have contributed significantly to debates around what a constitutional convention, which was citizen-led, might look like, but it isn't going to happen anytime soon. We ran 2 citizens' assemblies, actually, one in the north of England and one in the south of England. And these 2 assemblies were established in response to two issues that were pertinent to British politics. One is that there were discussions at the time around the need for a constitutional convention to settle some of the political arrangements in the UK, and in particular England, given devolution to Scotland and Wales. The discussions there were saying, okay, if this is going to happen, then it needs to be citizen-led. And then there were lots of debates around what does citizen-led actually mean, and we were arguing that people should consider the use of deliberative mini-public and a citizens' assembly as part of the process. So if you like, it was a project to show that citizens could engage in quite complex constitutional issues. And secondly, it was an intervention into the current debates that were going on at that time around devolution. We're seeing a process of devolution to city regions and the emergence of elected mayors, which is being driven by central government, has had no participatory processes in it at all. And so we wanted to show that actually there was a way of doing engagement around devolution that asked citizens what they think that they would like to see in their areas. So it was established to do that. What was kind of innovative about this project is that there is a debate at the moment around what citizens' assemblies should look like. So the citizens' assemblies that have happened in Canada and the Netherlands have been citizens only, randomly selected citizens who participate in a deliberative process, taking evidence from experts and from politicians. In Ireland, they've taken a different approach, which was to engage 66 citizens, randomly selected, and then 33 politicians who are appointed. Their argument being that bring the politicians in because A, they know more about the political process, and they can bring their expertise. And secondly, they can then take the decisions away with them, and they're more likely to have, their recommendations are more likely to have political effect. And we wanted to have a look to see whether or not there was a difference in the way these institutions operate. So in Assembly North, we used the classic mini-public design with citizens only. And then in Assembly South, which is the one that I was the research director for, we had a mixture of citizens and local councillors. And then we ran the assembly over 2 separate weekends with a Facebook group in between the 2 weekends to allow some online engagement, some questions, and some presentations of issues. And we were, if you like, we were doing a research project in relation to what difference does it make to bring politicians into the process, and at the same time trying to make an intervention into the political debate, saying, A, you can use citizens' assemblies as part of a constitutional process, and B, they should be engaged much more deeply in this sort of devolution issue that's going on.
I asked Graham about what conclusions could be drawn from these two citizens' assemblies.
Well, being an academic, we're still doing the analysis a year on, which is why we're not practitioners. We do have some initial insights, and I think they're very interesting. So in Assembly North, politicians were able to give evidence, were witnesses to the Assembly, and of course their contribution was valued by the participants there. But in Assembly South, there was an extra dimension, which was they were participants in the whole of the deliberative process. The citizens said that they were non-partisan, which was good. They said that the politicians who were participating provided lots of really helpful information in the process. So in a sense, it sounds a good thing having politicians present. We also asked a couple of survey questions to the citizens about the extent to which they were influenced by particular members of the Assembly, in Assembly South this is, and whether they were dominated, whether discussions were dominated such that they were less able to contribute in those processes. And what we found in Assembly South, obviously specific to Assembly South, not in the North, was that the citizens overwhelmingly named politicians in both of those categories. So politicians were the most influential participants in those processes, according to the citizens. And when there was domination, it tended to be the politicians. Now, this, as a political scientist, is concerning, because one of the reasons that we hold mini publics is in order to get a judgment from the public as to, having learnt about the issues, deliberated about the issues. And if you like, the judgments emerge from citizens engaging with each other. The difficulty in Assembly South, it appears, is that very early on, their judgments were being shaped by the perspectives of the politicians. And this isn't a surprise. The politicians are more confident. They've been engaged in these sorts of processes before. We shouldn't be surprised that it's their perspectives that influence. But that means that, to me, it means that the judgments that came out of Assembly South are more likely to be shaped by the interests of politicians than we would like if we take the idea of deliberative mini-publics seriously. So I think what our small experiment has done, and it was only a small experiment, we're only talking about 30, 35 participants in each assembly. And obviously, if you ran this like the British Columbia, we would be running it not over 2 weekends, but over 7 or 8 weekends. But our initial research suggests that very early on in the process, if you have politicians as participants, not just giving evidence, then we should expect them to shape the judgments, shape the processes in quite significant ways, which may, and I think would, undermine the logic of deliberative mini-publics. I think it doesn't necessarily discount the model, because there might be political pragmatic reasons for doing it. But what I think it says is this is no longer a classical mini-public. It is something else. It's what we're calling, I guess, a mixed model. One of the things that we have some evidence for is that influence wasn't so heavy in the second weekend, perhaps because the participants, the citizens became more confident, and also because actually we had less politicians turn up. They tended not to come in such numbers to the second weekend. But my challenge to that is, in a sense, the damage was done early on, by the shaping in the first weekend. It's probably worth reflecting here that the G1000 movement, which began in Belgium, started off with citizens only. So this was the attempt to bring 1,000 citizens into a room for a day to deliberate on issues of the Belgian politics. And it's been taken up in the Netherlands, and there they involve a majority randomly selected citizens, but they also invite politicians, bureaucrats, businesses, citizen activists. And their argument is that they want to get the system in the whole room. So, if you like, a mirror of the whole system. And they do things very differently. They don't start off with an agenda. They kind of say, well, what do you think the issues are that we should be dealing with? And at the end of the day, they actually have 9 or 10 issues that have emerged and work groups who take them forward. Now, that's interesting because most mini publics end with the recommendation and the citizens don't get involved after that necessarily. Whereas in the G1000, they've kind of taken the model and said, let's use this as a way of seeding action. So a bit like the Irish perspective, the designers of G1000 in the Netherlands have kind of said, actually, we need to have those people in the room because we want to make sure things happen afterwards. And so, it's very interesting that people are starting to experiment with the model. And I think for someone like myself, what's happening is, we're seeing these sort of innovations and the creation of a different type of institution. I don't think these are deliberative mini publics anymore. I think they're something else. That doesn't make them unworthy of a democratic status. They are just a different sort of institution now. And my feeling is the Irish Constitutional Convention is a different institution from a standard Citizens Assembly. And the interesting question there, Nivek, is whether or not the project has any life, in the sense of, whether at some point your report will always stay on the shelf or whether someone may pick it up at another point. And we know that we've seeded lots of debates within Parliament, within select committees. Members of our project have given evidence to select committees, and we know there's a civil society organisations who are still sort of pushing around this area. So we've had some sort of effect on people operating in this policy space. The issue is we haven't had the direct effect that we had initially hoped. And you just never know, do you? You just don't know what. It's such a contingent process, political influence, that we have no idea in the long run how our work will have shaped the work of others.
Finally, Graham reflected on whether a Citizens Assembly might have been a worthwhile process to tease out some of the issues ahead of the Brexit referendum.
There are a number of us who argued that there should have been one. I argued that there should have been one to inform the referendum process, a bit like the Citizens Initiative review in Oregon. There are still actually arguments about whether or not one should be held now to discuss the different permutations that Brexit could take, because there are so many types of Brexit that actually it would be interesting to know what a randomly selected group of citizens, given time to think about these things, actually thought would be the best course of action. But our current government doesn't have a good record on citizen engagement has a good record on running a referendum, but hasn't got a good record in terms of these more innovative ways of engaging citizens. So I don't know about one having happened, and I can't see one happening either.
Graham talked a bit about the G1000, which started as very much a deliberative mini public in Belgium and has now expanded and evolved into other countries throughout Europe, including soon to be in the UK. You'll hear more about the G1000 in a future episode of Real Democracy Now!, a podcast. In the next episode, the focus will be on what is the essence of a real democracy. This has been something I've been asking all of my guests. I'd like to know what you think is the essence of a real democracy too. You can let me know on Twitter, Facebook, or by email to Nivek, Nivek, at realdemocracynow.com.au. I hope you'll join me then. Thanks for listening to Real Democracy Now! You can find more about today's topic in the show notes at www.realdemocracynow.com.au. If you enjoyed this program, please subscribe to this podcast, write a review, share the podcast with your friends, and join the conversation on the webpage or on Facebook or Twitter. I'd love to know what you think is the essence of a real democracy.